Hey Reddit, I'm Emma, 26F, and I'm here to share a story about family drama that's been brewing for years, but finally boiled over recently. It all revolves around my older sister, Olivia, 30F, our complicated sibling dynamic, and a wedding that turned everything upside down. Olivia and I have always had a strange relationship. She's the textbook definition of the golden child: outgoing, confident, effortlessly charming. Growing up, she was the star of every family gathering: prom queen, valedictorian, the one everyone assumed would go far. Meanwhile, I was the quieter, artsy kid who stayed in the background. I didn't mind it much until I got older and realized how much space Olivia seemed to take up in every room. In my early teens, I discovered makeup. It started as a hobby, watching YouTube tutorials and experimenting with drugstore products. Over time, it became a form of self-expression for me. I loved how a swipe of eyeliner or a bold lip could make me feel more like myself. By the time I was in college, makeup wasn't just something I enjoyed, it was a part of who I was. People started noticing too. Compliments about my makeup became a regular thing, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just Olivia's little sister, I was Emma, and people were seeing me for me. This shift didn't go unnoticed by Olivia. She never said anything outright, but I could tell it bothered her. Little comments started creeping in. "Wow, Emma, you're wearing a lot of makeup today." Or, "Don't you think that's a bit much for brunch?" It felt like she was trying to pull me back into her shadow. But I brushed it off. I wasn't going to stop doing something that made me happy just because it made her uncomfortable. Fast forward to earlier this year, when Olivia announced her engagement to her long-term boyfriend. The wedding planning kicked into high gear, and as expected, Olivia was the center of attention. I was genuinely happy for her, even though the family dynamic hadn't changed much. Our mom was practically glued to Olivia's side, helping her pick out flowers and centerpieces, while I was mostly kept in the loop through group chats. Then came the bombshell. At a family dinner, Olivia pulled me aside and casually mentioned that she had a small request for the wedding and the events leading up to it. She asked me to tone down my makeup for her engagement party and the wedding. At first, I thought she was joking, but no, she was dead serious. She said she didn't want me drawing attention on her big day. I was stunned. It wasn't like I was planning to show up in glitter eyeliner and neon lipstick. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just wanted to wear makeup the way I always do. It felt unfair and controlling. I told her I'd think about it, but the conversation left a bad taste in my mouth. The next day, I brought up Olivia's request to my parents. My mom immediately took Olivia's side, saying, "It's her wedding. You should respect her wishes." My dad, ever the peacemaker, stayed neutral, saying he understood both perspectives. It was clear that if I pushed back, I'd be painted as the difficult one. To keep the peace, I reluctantly agreed to scale back my makeup for the engagement party. I showed up wearing a barely there look, light foundation, a hint of mascara, and a neutral lip. The reactions were not great. People kept commenting on how different I looked, asking if I was feeling okay or if I'd stopped wearing makeup altogether. Olivia, on the other hand, seemed pleased. She spent most of the night basking in the attention and barely acknowledged me. It was frustrating, but I held my tongue. Things came to a head later that night, after the party. Olivia cornered me in the kitchen and accused me of not trying hard enough to tone down my appearance. She said the comments from guests about my new look made her feel like I was still trying to steal the spotlight. That was the last straw. I told her I wasn't going to change who I was, just to make her feel better about herself. She stormed off, and the tension between us has been unbearable ever since. The next day, I turned to Reddit for advice. I laid everything out, from Olivia's request to the engagement party fallout. The responses were mixed. Some people said I should compromise since it's her wedding, while others called out Olivia's insecurities and controlling behavior. The most upvoted comment said, "This isn't about makeup. It's about your sister's inability to handle not being the center of attention." That hit a nerve because it felt true. Since then, things have only gotten more awkward. At a recent family dinner, Olivia brought up the makeup issue again, accusing me of always needing to be the star. I finally snapped and told her I wouldn't attend any more wedding events if she kept dictating my choices. The room went silent, and I left feeling both relieved and guilty. Now the family is divided. Olivia's telling anyone who will listen that I'm trying to ruin her wedding, while I'm over here wondering how we got to this point. All I wanted was to support my sister without losing myself in the process. But right now, that feels impossible. After the family dinner blow-up, I thought things would calm down. I was dead wrong. The next morning, my mom called me, her voice unusually stern. She got straight to the point. I needed to apologize to Olivia and agree to her simple request. She insisted that weddings are stressful and that I should make it easier on my sister by giving in. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. If I didn't comply, I'd be the one causing unnecessary family drama. Later that evening, my dad called. His tone was quieter, almost apologetic. He admitted he didn't think Olivia's request was fair, but urged me to consider keeping the peace for the family's sake. He wasn't pushy like my mom, but it still felt like pressure. He even joked about how Olivia had always been a little high maintenance, but said this was just how she dealt with stress. I could tell he didn't want to take sides, but the message was clear. I was on my own in this. Meanwhile, Olivia started texting me every single day. Her messages weren't long, but they were relentless. She kept repeating how selfish I was being, how my makeup choices were disrespectful, and how I was making everything harder for her. It felt like she was trying to wear me down. At one point, she even brought up old grudges like how I supposedly always had to make things about myself. It was exhausting. Then she escalated things by bringing the issue into our family group chat. Olivia made a long post about how she was disappointed in my unwillingness to compromise, and how hurtful it was that I couldn't support her on the most important day of her life. She didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who she was talking about. Cousins and aunts jumped in, mostly siding with Olivia. A few said things like, "It's her wedding, just let her have this one." An aunt even called me immature. I stayed quiet. There was no point arguing in a group chat where everyone had already picked their side. Feeling cornered, I vented to my best friend. She didn't sugarcoat it. She said this wasn't about makeup at all. It was about Olivia's insecurities. She told me to stand my ground, reminding me that I had every right to express myself. It was a reality check I desperately needed. A few days later was Olivia's bridal shower. I didn't want to go, but skipping it would have caused more drama. So I showed up wearing a very simple look: mascara, a bit of blush, and a nude lip. I figured it was neutral enough to avoid more complaints. Everything was fine at first, until Olivia spotted me talking to a group of her friends. She walked up, gave me a once-over, and accused me of still not getting it. She made a comment about my eyeliner being too much for her shower. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough that everyone around us heard. I wanted to sink into the floor. After that, I excused myself to the bathroom, trying to collect myself. The rest of the shower felt like a blur. Olivia avoided me, and I avoided her. By the end of the event, I knew I couldn't keep doing this. The constant criticism was too much. When I got home, I posted an update on Reddit. I asked if I should skip the wedding altogether to avoid more drama. The responses were overwhelmingly in my favor. People told me Olivia was being unreasonable and controlling. Some shared similar experiences with their own siblings, which made me feel less alone. The next morning, I got a private message from a cousin who had stayed quiet in the group chat. She admitted she thought Olivia was being unreasonable, but said she didn't want to get involved. She told me she admired how I was standing up for myself and encouraged me to keep doing what felt right. Around this time, I started reflecting on my childhood. Olivia had always needed to be the center of attention. Every school recital, every family vacation, every holiday. It was always about her. If I ever tried to shine, even just a little, she found a way to overshadow me. It made sense now why she was so fixated on controlling my appearance for her wedding. This wasn't just about makeup. It was about her needing to feel superior. A few days later, Olivia texted me with a compromise. She said I could wear makeup to the wedding if I got her to approve the look beforehand. I didn't even need time to think about it. I refused. It felt humiliating to even consider letting her dictate what I could or couldn't wear. She didn't take the rejection well. The next morning, Olivia posted in the family group chat that I was officially uninvited from the wedding unless I apologized and agreed to her terms. It was a full-on family blow-up. Some relatives called me selfish, others stayed quiet. My dad sent me a private message saying he was sorry it had come to this, but he hoped I'd reconsider. I didn't. I stood my ground. The support I got from Reddit helped me feel confident in my decision. Most commenters told me I wasn't wrong and reminded me that family doesn't get to control you just because they're family. So, as of now, I'm not going to the wedding. Olivia can have her day exactly how she wants it. I just hope it's worth all the drama she's caused. Update 2. After Olivia officially uninvited me from her wedding, the fallout was immediate. Within days, my phone was blowing up. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began calling and texting, accusing me of being selfish and ruining Olivia's big day. It was like Olivia had put out a family-wide APB, painting me as the villain who dared to say no to the bride. The messages weren't just from immediate family either. A second cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted me out of the blue, saying I should just apologize and move on. The general theme was that weddings are sacred, and I was overreacting. One aunt even called me jealous, which was laughable considering I had zero interest in competing with Olivia. Thankfully, my friends had my back. My best friend, in particular, went into full cheerleader mode, reminding me I wasn't the one being unreasonable. Another friend offered to take me out for drinks, calling it a celebration of dodging bridezilla bullets. Their support kept me grounded, while my family seemed intent on tearing me down. Then Olivia took things public. She posted a photo of herself with the caption, "Some people don't know how to let others have their moment. Glad to know who really supports me." She didn't tag me, but the timing and tone made it clear who she was talking about. The comment section turned into a pity party, with her friends chiming in about how hard it must be for her to deal with toxic people. It was infuriating. I debated staying silent, but ultimately decided to write my own response. Not on her post, but on my own page. I kept it measured, explaining that I respected Olivia's desire to have her day how she wanted it, but I also wasn't willing to compromise my identity to make someone else feel better. I didn't name Olivia or give specific details, but it was enough to stop some of the side-eye I'd been getting from mutual acquaintances. Surprisingly, 2 cousins privately reached out to me after seeing my post. Both admitted they regretted siding with Olivia so quickly. One even said she felt pressured to back Olivia because it's her wedding. Their messages felt like small wins in what had been a losing battle. The wedding happened without me, but the drama didn't end there. A week later, photos from the event started popping up on social media. At first, I avoided them, not wanting to see what I'd missed. But curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on a few tagged photos. The pictures told an interesting story. Olivia looked gorgeous, as expected, but in several shots, her smile seemed forced. In one group photo, she looked outright annoyed. A mutual friend later told me there had been tension at the reception, though she didn't elaborate. Part of me wondered if Olivia had spent the night stressing over whether her big day was perfect enough. Then came my mom's call. She was crying before I even picked up. She begged me to reconcile with Olivia, saying that family comes first and that all this drama was tearing everyone apart. She even tried to guilt-trip me by saying Olivia had been so stressed in the weeks leading up to the wedding. I listened, but didn't give her the response she wanted. If anything, her call just reinforced how much of the blame was being unfairly placed on me. A few days later, Olivia's husband got involved. He called me, claiming he wanted to mediate between us. He said Olivia was hurt by everything that had happened, but insisted she still loved me deep down. It felt like he was trying to play both sides. I thanked him for reaching out, but made it clear I wasn't interested in rehashing the argument. On a brighter note, I got some unexpected good news at work. My manager called me into her office and announced I'd been promoted to a senior position. The timing couldn't have been better. After weeks of family drama, it felt amazing to have something positive to focus on. My coworkers even threw me a small celebration, complete with cupcakes and a congratulatory card. One of them, a fellow makeup enthusiast, gifted me a high-end makeup set as a nod to my hobby. It was such a thoughtful gesture, and it reminded me that not everyone sees my passion as a problem. Meanwhile, my Reddit post started gaining traction. Comments poured in from strangers sharing their own stories of family drama. Some even messaged me privately to thank me for standing my ground, saying it inspired them to do the same in their lives. Knowing my experience resonated with others made me feel less alone. Then came the family meeting. My dad organized it, hoping to mend fences. I didn't want to go, but he insisted it was important. The meeting was exactly what I expected, tense and unproductive. Olivia doubled down, claiming my makeup overshadowed her even on regular days. She accused me of intentionally trying to steal the spotlight, and when I calmly pointed out how ridiculous that sounded, she stormed out of the room. I followed her lead shortly after, realizing there was no point in continuing. When I got home, I updated Reddit again. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive, with people encouraging me to keep prioritizing my boundaries. One commenter summed it up perfectly. "You're not just fighting for yourself, you're teaching your family how to treat you." And that's exactly what I intend to keep doing. A few weeks after the disastrous family meeting, something surprising showed up in my mailbox. A handwritten letter from Olivia. I hadn't heard directly from her since the meeting, so it caught me off guard. The letter was lengthy, filled with apologies and what sounded like genuine remorse. Olivia admitted she had been unfair, saying she let her insecurities get the better of her. She even acknowledged that her behavior during the wedding planning was controlling. I wasn't sure what to think. On one hand, it was nice to see her take accountability, something she'd rarely done before. On the other hand, I couldn't help but wonder if this sudden change of heart was motivated by guilt or the growing backlash she'd been facing. People had started noticing her behavior, and not all the whispers were flattering. Soon after, our family hosted a BBQ. I wasn't planning to go, but my dad convinced me it would be good to show up and clear the air. I arrived late, hoping to avoid unnecessary small talk. Olivia approached me not long after I walked in. To my surprise, she apologized publicly in front of several relatives. She said she regretted how she'd acted during the wedding drama and acknowledged that she'd let the stress get to her. For a moment, it felt like progress. But then she added, almost as an afterthought, that she hoped I'd work on my obsession with makeup, because it was becoming a bit much. It was a classic Olivia move, one step forward, two steps back. I took a deep breath, told her firmly that I wouldn't tolerate any more passive-aggressive comments, and walked away. The BBQ became awkward after that, with relatives avoiding eye contact and mumbling about family tension. A week later, I got a message from a mutual friend who had attended Olivia's wedding. She shared a few of the professional bridal photos, adding that she thought I might want to see them. The pictures showed Olivia looking beautiful, but there was something off in her expression. In many of the shots, she looked tense, almost like she wasn't enjoying herself. It confirmed what I'd suspected. Even without me there, Olivia couldn't fully relax on her big day. Seeing those photos made me feel even more confident about my decision to skip the wedding. I wasn't the problem. Her insecurity was. Around the same time, Olivia found herself facing online backlash. Someone had anonymously posted about her wedding behavior on a local forum, detailing her unreasonable demands and the drama with her sister. The post didn't name names, but it was specific enough for people in our social circles to connect the dots. Olivia's reputation took a hit, with several acquaintances reaching out to me, asking if the story was true. Olivia, of course, assumed I was behind the leak. She called me, accusing me of spreading the story to make her look bad. I denied it, and she didn't push the issue further, but the conversation ended on a sour note. Later, I found out from another cousin that Olivia had been venting about me at work, claiming I was out to ruin her life. It was exhausting to hear, but I chose not to engage. At this point, it felt pointless to argue with her. On a brighter note, all the drama inspired me to channel my energy into something positive. I started a blog about self-expression and confidence, sharing stories about my journey with makeup and the lessons I'd learned along the way. The blog gained traction quickly, with readers commenting on how relatable my posts were. It felt good to turn a painful experience into something meaningful. A few weeks later, my dad invited me to lunch. He told me he wanted to help Olivia and me mend our relationship, but this time, he took a different approach. Instead of asking me to compromise, he focused on giving us a neutral space to talk. Olivia showed up reluctantly, but to my surprise, the conversation went better than I expected. For the first time, Olivia admitted she'd always felt overshadowed by me in certain ways. She said my ability to express myself so confidently had made her feel inadequate, even if she couldn't put it into words at the time. Hearing her say that was eye-opening. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand where some of her actions were coming from. We ended up reminiscing about our childhood, laughing over shared memories of family vacations and silly inside jokes. For a moment, it felt like the tension melted away. But even as we found common ground, I knew I needed to set boundaries for my own mental health. After that lunch, I decided to take a step back from Olivia. I told her I appreciated the apology and the conversation, but I needed time to focus on myself. She didn't argue, which was a small miracle in itself. My decision wasn't met with universal approval. My mom called me, upset that I wasn't fully reconciling with Olivia. Other relatives took sides, with some saying I was right to prioritize my well-being, and others accusing me of being cold. But for the first time in years, I didn't care what anyone else thought. My blog was thriving, my friends were supportive, and I finally felt free to live my life without constantly worrying about Olivia's opinion. I ended my latest Reddit post by thanking everyone who had followed my story and offered advice. Their support had been a lifeline during one of the most challenging times in my life. Now, I'm focusing on building a future where I prioritize my happiness, and that feels pretty amazing. Months passed after Olivia's radio silence, and life seemed to settle into a new normal. I focused on my blog, which was now reaching a wider audience than I'd ever anticipated. Readers were sharing their own stories of navigating family drama, and it felt empowering to be part of a supportive community. Just when I thought Olivia was out of the picture for good, she called me out of the blue. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Olivia's voice was hesitant, not the commanding tone I'd grown used to. She told me she'd been in therapy for a few months and realized how her insecurities had driven her actions. She wanted to repair our relationship. Her tone seemed sincere, but I couldn't ignore the history between us. Still, I agreed to meet her for coffee, wanting to hear what she had to say in person. When we met, Olivia admitted she'd been projecting her own feelings of inadequacy onto me. She talked about how my confidence and self-expression had always made her feel insecure, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. She said she regretted how she treated me during her wedding planning and acknowledged the damage it caused to our relationship. It wasn't easy to sit through, but it felt like the most genuine apology I'd ever received from her. I accepted her apology, but made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any controlling behavior in the future. If it happened again, I told her I'd have no problem cutting contact permanently. She nodded, and for the first time, it felt like she really understood my boundaries. A few weeks later, our dad organized a family dinner to help facilitate the reconciliation. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I decided to go, if only to show Olivia I was willing to meet her halfway. The evening was tense. Our mom was on edge, and other relatives seemed unsure whether to act like everything was normal or tread carefully. Despite the awkward atmosphere, there were no major blow-ups, and Olivia kept her composure. It felt like progress, even if only a small step forward. After the dinner, Mom pulled me aside. She apologized for how she'd taken Olivia's side during the wedding drama, admitting she'd felt pressured to prioritize Olivia as the bride. She said she regretted not supporting me more and hoped we could all move on. Her apology caught me off guard, but I appreciated it nonetheless. Over the next few months, I noticed changes in Olivia. She stopped making passive-aggressive comments and started reaching out in more thoughtful ways. For example, she sent me a birthday card with a heartfelt message, something she hadn't done in years. She also began asking about my blog and genuinely seemed interested in my work. While I was cautious about fully trusting her, these small gestures made me think she was serious about changing. As our communication improved, Olivia opened up about her own struggles. She admitted she'd felt overshadowed in her marriage too, and that those feelings had forced her to confront her pattern of controlling behavior. Hearing her be so vulnerable was a side of her I wasn't used to, and it gave me hope that our relationship could evolve into something healthier. At one point, Olivia suggested we try joint therapy to address some of the lingering tension between us. I agreed, and the sessions turned out to be surprisingly helpful. The therapist helped us identify triggers and taught us strategies to navigate future conflicts. It wasn't a magic fix, but it gave us a foundation to build on. As word spread through the family that Olivia and I were working on our issues, the atmosphere shifted. Relatives who had taken sides during the wedding drama seemed relieved to see us talking again. Even our mom seemed less stressed, although she still had moments of trying to play mediator unnecessarily. Olivia's husband reached out again during this time, thanking me for giving Olivia another chance. He shared that her therapy had also improved their marriage, which was a nice reminder that personal growth has ripple effects. Then something unexpected happened. I got engaged. My fiancé proposed during a weekend getaway, and it was everything I'd ever wanted: simple, heartfelt, and drama-free. Olivia offered to help with the wedding planning, but I politely declined, preferring to avoid any potential conflicts. She took it well, which felt like another small victory. On my wedding day, Olivia surprised me with a speech during the reception. She stood up and talked about how much she admired my confidence and individuality, acknowledging the mistakes she'd made in the past. It was emotional and heartfelt, and it felt like a true turning point in our relationship. As I looked around the room that night, I couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come. Standing up for myself during Olivia's wedding had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it had also been the most rewarding. Setting boundaries hadn't just protected me, it had forced the people around me to respect my autonomy. I ended my journey where it began, on Reddit. I wrote a final post thanking the community for their advice and support throughout the chaos. I shared the lessons I'd learned about family, boundaries, and the importance of self-respect. My closing message was simple: even when it's difficult, prioritizing your well-being is always worth it. This isn't just a story about makeup or weddings or family drama. It's a story about self-discovery, about finding your voice, and about learning to love yourself even when it feels like the people closest to you don't. It's a story about setting boundaries, demanding respect, and refusing to let anyone dim your light. And most importantly, it's a story about forgiveness, growth, and the possibility of building a new kind of relationship with the people who once hurt you most. Because sometimes, even the most broken bonds can be mended, and sometimes, the people who once made you feel small can become the ones who cheer you on the loudest. Story 2. I recently left my family's house for the first time at the age of 28. That might not seem like much to some, but to me, it was a massive thing. To be honest, I used to be fine with my family being really close-knit and knowing one another's personal affairs. However, I wanted some space after years of feeling like I had to take care of my younger siblings and balance family expectations. My two siblings are a 22-year-old brother and a 25-year-old sister. I was always the one others turned to for guidance, assistance with homework, driving lessons, and pretty much anything that involved being a responsible adult since I was the eldest. My parents, who are both in their mid-50s, have always been active in our lives. By that, I mean that they are always keeping an eye on us, are aware of our schedules, and are always willing to provide a hand when needed. Please understand that I adore my family. However, as I grew older, I began to feel constrained. Privacy never existed, as late as my 20s. Without knowing what others thought, I couldn't decide. I so concluded that I needed to obtain a house of my own. On the opposite side of town was a little flat. It's mine, but it's nothing special. And before I moved, I at last felt like I had some breathing room. My parents, siblings, and I had to sit down. I made an effort to clarify that I would require some time to get used to living alone. I intended to establish limits, such as requesting that they phone before coming and designating particular days for family time. Although my siblings appeared to understand and my parents nodded in agreement, I had a sneaking suspicion that they didn't really get what I was requesting. I experienced living alone for the first time a few days after I moved in. Quiet, without any disturbances, and just me alone. While it lasted, it was incredible. Then I heard someone knock on my door on the 4th day. My mother was standing there with 2 grocery bags. She simply showed up without calling or texting. She claimed she wanted to bring me some food since she was concerned that I wasn't eating well. I thanked her since I didn't want to come out as ungrateful. However, I reminded her that we had decided to call before visiting. She dismissed it, claiming that she was just a mother and that she was worried about her daughter living alone. I ignored it in the hopes that it wouldn't occur again. It did, spoiler alert. My sister showed up with an overnight bag the next weekend. I just wanted to crash for the weekend, she says. I reasoned that perhaps she simply wanted to spend time with me because she missed me, so I gave her permission to stay. I was hoping it would only happen once. Then, though, it began to take on a pattern. Frequent messages in the family group chat and that group chat, unexpected visits and brief drop-ins. Whoa. I would receive follow-up texts asking if I was okay, why I wasn't responding, or if I was too busy for the family right now if I didn't respond within a few hours. Without someone expecting me to be available, I felt as though I couldn't even have a moment to myself. When my dad decided to drop by my workplace one afternoon, it was the last straw. I noticed him waving in the lobby while I was in the middle of my shift. He felt that a lunch date would be pleasant. My coworkers were giving me confused looks, and I had to awkwardly explain. But yes, that was my dad. And no, he didn't tell me he was coming. I quickly told him that I was busy and couldn't chat, and he left looking a bit hurt, but I felt more embarrassed than anything. After that incident, I realized I needed to have a serious talk with my parents, so I invited them over for dinner, thinking a calm sit-down conversation might do the trick. I explained how I felt about the unannounced visits and the constant texts. I told them it wasn't that I didn't want to see them, it's just that I needed some time to adjust to my new life, and that I valued my privacy. But instead of taking it seriously, they just laughed. My mom waved it off, saying I was being dramatic, and my dad joked that they were just showing me how much they cared. They kept saying things like, "You'll understand when you have kids," which just made me feel like they weren't listening at all. After that, my brother started asking me to run errands for him, since I lived closer to certain shops. When I said no because I had other plans, he got all mopey, saying he thought I'd be more helpful now that I was out on my own. And it was like no one understood that I had my own life and responsibilities to manage. Then came the guilt trips. My mom would drop little comments like, "I miss the old days when we all had dinner together every night," or "It's just not the same without you." I knew she didn't mean to make me feel bad, but it was working. I'd start to question if I was being too harsh, if maybe I was asking for too much. So I talked to a few close friends about it, and they all had the same advice. You need to be firm with your boundaries. They reminded me that just because I loved my family didn't mean I had to give up my space or let them dictate my life. It was nice to hear that I wasn't being unreasonable, even though my family made me feel like I was taking their advice to heart. I typed out a message for the family group chat, laying out clear rules for visits and communication. I told them I loved them, but needed time to adjust, and that I'd appreciate if they respected my space. I even set up a few regular dinner dates so we could still catch up for about a week. Things seemed to get better. The visits slowed down, the texts became less frequent, and I actually had time to settle into my new routine. But then everything blew up when I couldn't make it to a last-minute family dinner. Suddenly, I was getting calls and texts accusing me of not caring about the family anymore. It was like all the progress we've made disappeared overnight, and that's when I realized this wasn't going to be as simple as just asking for space. Update 1 pal. So things escalated quickly after that last blow-up about the family dinner. My parents and I had a tense back and forth, but I kept standing my ground. I hoped they may come to grasp that I wanted my own place. But then, one Saturday morning, they came up at my flat again. Utterly unexpected. I hadn't even eaten breakfast yet when I heard a knock. And there they were, beaming on my doorway, claiming they were in the neighborhood. They carried a bag of groceries with them like it was intended to smooth things out. I took a deep breath and reminded them of our agreement about phoning before visiting. My dad merely shrugged and said they assumed I wouldn't mind. My mom piped in about how she missed me, and they believed it would be a pleasant surprise, but I wasn't backing down this time. I told them it wasn't a good time for a visit, and that I needed them to respect the boundaries I had set. They didn't take it well. My mom's face plummeted and my dad started to appear upset. They waited there for a few awkward seconds, waiting for me to alter my mind until they saw I wasn't budging. They departed looking wounded and disturbed. As they went away, I could hear my mom moaning about how they never thought their own daughter would shut them out like this. After they went, I sat on my couch wondering whether I had been too harsh. But deep down, I knew I had to keep to my limits if I wanted things to change. In the days that followed, my parents' quiet was terrible. When I tried to say hello to them in the family group chat, they stopped texting me. "I hope all is okay with you." No one responded to my messages. They were ignoring me, and I began to question whether I had exacerbated the situation, just when I was beginning to believe that I might have overreached myself. My sister started sending me a lot of messages. At first, it was simply casual conversation about her week, asking whether I had seen a certain television program. Then, however, the guilt trip began. She informed me that my treatment of mom and dad had left them devastated. She scolded me of being self-centered and advised me to consider their sentiments. The texts continued to arrive many times a day, as if she wanted to exhaust me. The emergency call then arrived. My mom sounded frightened when my phone called one evening. She spoke quickly, stating that there was a problem with the dishwasher at home and that she was unsure of what to do. I snatched up my keys and hurried over, only to discover that it was nothing more serious than a loose pipe that didn't even need any equipment. By the time I got there, my dad had already fixed it. At that moment, I understood that everything had been blown out of proportion to bring me there. The final straw was that. The next day, I urged my sister to quit manipulating me by pulling her aside. I informed her that it wasn't fair, and that I understood what she was doing. "I thought I was too good for the family now that I had my own place," she retorted. There in my parents' living room, it escalated into a full-fledged quarrel. I was more irritated than ever when my sister stormed off. That night, I posted on Reddit. Real, objective guidance was what I needed. I explained all that had transpired and inquired as to whether I was wrong for adamantly establishing my limits. The majority of the answers were positive. I was advised that I wasn't asking for too much, and that if my family couldn't respect my personal space, it could be time to think about more serious measures. Many commentators indicated that I might have to impose penalties, even if it meant putting them out of my life for a while. I became aware that I needed assistance on my next course of action after going through every reply. I thus scheduled a therapy session. I went over everything with you throughout our session. My shame, my dread of losing them entirely, and my parents' disregard for my limits. The therapist helped me realize that wanting to live my own life was perfectly acceptable and that I should not back down, even if it made me uncomfortable. I chose to take a different tack. I spoke with my parents and offered a middle ground. Twice a month, I would come over for family meals, but outside of those times, they had to respect my privacy. My father concurred, stating that it seemed sensible. However, my mother was obviously not overjoyed. She was often saying that she thought I was drifting away from the family, but in the end, she consented. For a short while, everything appeared to calm down. The family dinners were actually very pleasant, and my dad followed the plan. Just catching up over a lunch, nothing dramatic. However, it didn't take long for my mother to begin giving me clues that she wanted me to come over more frequently, such as remarking how much food she had prepared or how they had saved me a plate. I tried to ignore it since I could see where it was going. Then, without warning, my brother called to ask if I could assist him with moving some furniture. Since I was so near, I informed him that I had an earlier engagement that day, so I couldn't. He became irritated and said he had assumed that since I was living alone, I would be more accessible. Though I knew I couldn't allow them to continue dragging me back into old habits, that chat left me with a sour taste in my mouth. By that point, I was more resolved than ever to maintain my limits, no matter how many awkward talks or guilt trips I had. I reminded myself that I had left home in the first place to live my own life without having to live up to expectations all the time. However, I returned home one evening to see my mother waiting on the steps of my apartment building, just when I thought I had everything under control. She informed me that she missed our conversations, and that all she wanted was to see me. Even though I was worn out from work and didn't want to get into another argument, I stood my position. "She should have phoned first," I replied, gently reminding her of our arrangement. She didn't protest this time, but she did appear hurt. She simply walked away without saying anything, and I went inside to question whether things would ever get easier. It seems to happen every time I believe I've advanced. I'm drawn back in by something. Right now, I'm holding the line, but I have no idea what will happen next. The second update. I reasoned that things couldn't get much worse after that embarrassing run-in with my mom outside my apartment. Naturally, though, I was mistaken. When my mother returned a few days later, she appeared more emotional than ever. She said she just wanted to come inside and speak when she knocked on my door. Reminding her of our arrangement, I was strong and threatened to not open the door if she continued to drop by without warning. As she spoke through the door about how much she missed me and couldn't understand why I was acting this way, she broke down in tears in the hallway. Even though it was difficult to listen to her, I persisted. She eventually departed, wiping her eyes, and I returned inside, exhausted but certain that I had to keep her out or it would never end. My phone began vibrating with texts from my brother and sister the next morning. They were incensed, accusing me of causing our mother to cry and questioning how I could be so heartless. In paragraphs, my sister described how her mother had always gone above and above for us, and how I had now destroyed her. Not much better was my brother. He implied that since I moved out, I had become egotistical and heartless. They seemed to have conspired to instill guilt in me. I made the decision to discuss this with my therapist, since my phone was lighting up every few minutes. I informed her about my mom's situation and my siblings' reactions throughout our session. After listening intently, she recommended that I keep enforcing my limits, while also finding tiny ways to show my family that I still cared about them. She advised them to make an effort to mentally distance themselves from the concepts of rejection and boundaries. It seemed like a fantastic strategy, but I wasn't sure how to implement it, and I couldn't control how people saw it. My sister then posted the drama online. She wrote a weird status about people forgetting their roots and how family should always come first when I checked Facebook. I knew it was directed at me even though she didn't say my name. My relatives and aunts began messaging me within hours, inquiring as to what was going on and why I was acting so aloof. It was embarrassing. None of them got a response from me. All I could hope was that it would pass. However, I was aware that my family would not tolerate it that way. I proposed a family meeting because I felt I wanted to try one last time to get things straight. In the hopes that they would actually listen, I planned to get together with my parents and siblings and present my case once more. I even jotted out a list of the reasons I valued having space. Things like how I wasn't attempting to ignore them, how I needed time to get used to living alone, and how I handled work-related stress. Almost instantly, everything went wrong on the day of the meeting. Within minutes, my mother started weeping and expressed her feelings that I no longer wanted to be a member of the family. Instead of soothing her, my dad took her side, saying that my limits seemed like a personal rejection and that they had always prioritized their family. They didn't seem to hear a word I said, as if they were banding together against me. Every time I attempted to clarify that I wasn't attempting to leave them, my mother cut me off and asked whether I still cared about them. I was obviously failing to get through. My father wasn't much better. He said that I owe them continuous access to my life because of everything they had done for me over the years. I had to maintain my composure when I informed them that I could no longer continue to compromise my mental well-being in order to satisfy their demands. I remained steadfast, declaring that I would not compromise the boundaries I had established. My dad became silent and shook his head as if he couldn't believe what I was saying, and my mom simply looked devastated. The air in the room seemed thick, as if we had just stepped over a boundary that we would never be able to get back. Following that encounter, I could sense our growing separation. The few times my parents spoke to me were formal and tense. I was on the verge of losing them completely, but I was at a loss for what to do. Then I discovered that my brother had been discussing my social life behind my back with my parents. He had apparently been telling me about my friendships and how I had time to spend time with them, but not with my family. It was only when a cousin brought it up at a party that I learned about it, and it made my stomach turn. It seemed as though my own brother was using my life as leverage against me, and I felt deceived. I then made an effort to get back in touch with my brother, in the hopes that we could talk things out one-on-one. However, he was defensive from the moment we met, claiming that he had changed since moving out. He said that because I now had my own house, I was behaving superior to them. We both felt even more alienated once it descended into another quarrel. I gave everyone an update on Reddit once again, explaining what had happened and how I felt like I was losing my family. The outpouring of support was tremendous. I couldn't allow them to continue pushing my limits, even though so many people assured me I was doing the right thing. Even though I was afraid I was making a mistake, it provided me the motivation I needed to keep going. When I learned from a cousin that my parents had been discussing me with other family members, things became even worse. I was portrayed as the challenging person who didn't want to be around the family. Although it hurt, I understood that I had no control over their words. I had had enough of having to defend my decisions. I made the decision to act. In addition to installing a security camera outside my apartment, I sent my parents a note informing them that I would no longer open the door if they arrived without first calling. I was clear that this was the last time I would try to make them respect my personal space. I felt somewhat relieved, as if I had regained some control over my life, for the first time in a long time. I'm ready for whatever comes next, but I'm not sure how my parents will respond to this new limit. I just hope they realize that keeping my tranquility is more important than keeping them out. Update 3. I had hoped that things would settle down when the security camera was installed, but that optimism was short-lived. When the same name knocked on my door a few days later, I looked at the webcam feed. My parents, with their typical resolute looks, were standing outside. My dad appeared prepared for a fight, and my mom carried a pie as if it were a peace offering. I chose not to answer the door and instead observed them via the webcam. I heard my mother yelling my name as they knocked again, louder this time, and said they only wanted to chat. When I didn't answer for a few minutes, my dad became agitated and began to pace the room. After a time, my dad tried to see through the windows of my apartment as my mom sat on the steps, looking distressed. Despite the discomfort, I remained silent and watched the video stream until they eventually gave up and departed. My dad sent me an email when I got up the next morning. It was a long, long time. He wrote about how upset they were by my actions, how they never thought their own daughter would treat them in this manner, and how they would have to stop giving me money if I didn't start acting like a member of the family once again. Stunned, I sat there reading it. It was threatening. Despite the fact that since moving out, I've been financially independent. The email felt more like a power play than a real threat to my livelihood, because they hadn't helped me since I started my first job after college. I wasn't prepared for how hard the email impacted me. Feeling as though I was losing my family over something as basic as needing my own space, I ended up sobbing in my apartment. I gave another update on Reddit, detailing all that had transpired, including the email and the surveillance camera incident. It was astounding how supportive other users were. People advised me to stand my position and even implied that I might have to leave. For my own sanity, no contact. Others told similar tales, which helped me feel less isolated in this turmoil. I made the decision to speak with a lawyer after reading the comments. Although it may have seemed dramatic, I wanted to make sure my parents couldn't take any legal action that may have an impact on me, such as trying to bother me or tampering with any family inheritance. The attorney reassured me that I was in a strong position and that there was nothing that my parents could do to hurt me legally. Even though it didn't address the emotional aspect of the situation, hearing it was a comfort. When I thought things couldn't get much worse, my mother returned to my place of employment. This time, she was waiting in the lobby expecting to speak with me during my lunch break. When I saw her through the glass doors, my stomach fell. I tried to maintain my composure as I stepped out to meet her, knowing that this would not go well, but I informed her that she couldn't just show up at my job in this manner. She became upset and yelled at me about how much it hurt and how I was excluding her. People became aware. She looked over and became even more agitated. I asked her to go in a quiet voice, but it was too late. Already the scene was developing. She eventually departed with a wounded appearance, but the harm had already been done. HR summoned me in for a conversation later that day. They reminded me that personal matters shouldn't be brought into the job and were courteous but stern. I vowed not to let it happen again because I felt ashamed, but it only made the pressure I was already feeling worse. My brother made the decision to push the situation online a few days after the work incident. He provided screenshots to our family group chat of some of the pictures I shared on social media, including me grinning at a local pub with several buddies. "I evidently had time for everyone else, but not for our family," he said sarcastically. It seemed like a conscious effort to make me the villain. I read it again and explained how my brother was attempting to use my social life as further evidence against me. I received support from the comments, who urged me to think about avoiding touch. They made the observation that my family would most likely never respect my boundaries if they couldn't do so now. Then there was the surprise reinforcement visit. My aunt and uncle, whom they reportedly enlisted to arbitrate, arrived at my flat with my parents. My aunt and uncle attempted to mediate the situation, while my dad knocked and called my name as I watched through the security camera as everyone gathered outside. They asked me to come outdoors so we could all have a heart-to-heart while discussing how important family is. I knew I couldn't open the door, so I remained inside, my pulse pounding. For over an hour, they were out there, alternating between banging, talking, and finally simply waiting on the steps. They departed after what seemed like a lifetime. That evening, my dad escorted my mom back to the car as she was crying. I banned their phone numbers. Without the pressure and regular notifications, I needed time to reflect. I said on Reddit that I simply couldn't take it any longer and that I needed time to think about what to do next. Many users acknowledged that sometimes the only way to have a brief moment of calm was to temporarily ban access. I unblocked them after a week, and my phone rang with texts right away. Some were apologies. My dad seemed more reserved, and my mom said she simply missed me. Others, however, were full of charges, accusing me of causing the family to fall apart. I had anticipated it, but it was overpowering. I made the decision to try something new and asked my siblings if we could get together without our parents being there. Maybe, I thought, I could express myself more clearly without all the stress. However, the meeting was a failure. My brother labeled me cold-hearted and said I had changed since moving out, while my sister sobbed and said she didn't understand why I was doing this to the family. We seemed to be speaking different languages, and I felt even more alone when I left. I had to make my most difficult choice to date at that point. I informed my parents and siblings that I would not be communicating with them for a month. With this gap, I hoped they would understand that I wasn't attempting to drive them away. All I needed was my life. It felt unsettling during the first week of stillness. No unexpected visits, no texts. Simply be silent. Although it was a relief, there seemed to be a gap. After all this, I began to question whether this would possibly work if they respect my personal space. In the latter part of the month, I received a note in my mailbox. It was scribbled by my mother and was a little wobbly. She begged me to return to the family in her letter, saying that she missed me and didn't know what she had done wrong. Although that was difficult to read, I'm not sure whether I'm ready to get in touch just yet. Update. I found it difficult to disregard my mother's letter when I received it. Every word, which was penned by her, was full with expressions like, "We miss you," and "We just want our family back together." However, when I read it, I saw that she made no mention of the first reason I distanced myself from her in those pages. She made no mention of my desire for privacy or the frequent invasions. It all came down to how much they missed me and how heartbroken they were. I was torn. A part of me hoped that this was a start in the right direction, but I also realized that it wasn't addressing the issues that were most important. I posted excerpts of the letter and sought input on Reddit once more. Many people pointed out that the message looked more about shame than true understanding in the influx of answers. They said that before I made any decisions, I should stand my ground and wait for my limits to be really acknowledged. Some advised me to reply with a letter of my own outlining my position once more, but I wasn't sure whether it would truly reach them. I then happened to run across my brother at a cafe a few days later. It was just an accident, one of those uncomfortable small-town encounters when you're just trying to get coffee and wind up running into each other. He didn't greet me warmly, but he appeared equally shocked to see me. Things immediately became tense. He brought up the family turmoil, accusing me of exaggerating the situation and causing the family to fall apart over a trivial matter. I made an effort to clarify that it wasn't a minor matter. It was about seeking some freedom after feeling stifled for years. He didn't understand, though. After a few minutes of us going around in circles, I gave up and left, feeling the gap between us widen even further. Not long afterward, I received an unwelcome discovery from one of my close friends. They had been approached by my parents to see if they might try to persuade me to get back in touch with the family. Despite my embarrassment at their involvement of my pals, my friend steadfastly stood by them. They informed me that they supported my decision and had made it plain to my parents that they would not put any pressure on me. Hearing that someone had my back was a comfort, particularly at this unstable time. In my upcoming counseling session, I discussed all of these recent occurrences with my therapist, who helped me understand something I had previously struggled to understand. My parents' actions were more than simply an attempt to maintain their relationship. It has to do with control. They were upset that I had made choices over which they had no control. This insight came as a shock, but it also made me feel lighter. Just when I felt like things were becoming settled, it gave me greater confidence in the boundaries I had established. All of my favorite childhood treats were in the care box my parents gave me, along with a message that said, "We just wanted you to know we're thinking about you." I initially thought it was a kind gesture, but as I gave it more thinking, I realized how manipulative it felt, as if they were attempting to entice me back with sentimentality. I became even more upset since they were still ignoring the true problems. My dad then unexpectedly returned one evening. He was hammering on my door and insisting on speaking. With each knock, his voice rose. He was standing there looking irate as I viewed the video stream. I kept my word to them that I wouldn't be answering the door for an unexpected visit. But after a few minutes, when he still wouldn't go, I yelled through the door that if he didn't stop, I would call the police. He appeared to understand that. After a moment of hesitation and a troubled expression, he stormed off. I was shaken by the entire situation, but I knew I couldn't allow it to go on. I began giving a restraining order some serious thought after that incident. I asked whether anyone has experienced something similar in a Reddit post about it. The reactions were not all the same. While some feared it may worsen the situation with my family, others believed it was a vital measure to defend myself. I hadn't decided yet, and it was a difficult choice. My sister contacted me, her voice shaking as she apologized for how she treated me, just when I thought things couldn't be any more confusing. She acknowledged that she had never known how suffocating our family could be, and claimed she now understood why I needed space. She inquired as to whether it would be possible for us to meet alone without our parents being involved. I was taken aback, but I chose to give it a shot in the hopes that it would be a little step in the right direction. To my surprise, our chat went better than I had anticipated when we first met in a quiet cafe. My sister said that she had been too preoccupied with our parents' viewpoint and had not given much thought to how I would feel about it all. She also acknowledged that our parents' participation in her life occasionally made her feel overburdened, but she never considered protesting. For the first time, I felt like I had been seriously wounded by a member of my family. My sister volunteered to try speaking with our parents at the end of our meeting, letting them know that I wasn't leaving them, but that I simply needed some distance and time. I liked her willingness to try, even if I wasn't sure how much of a difference it would make. It seemed like a little victory, like perhaps, even if just little, things could change. My mother wrote me another letter a few days later. The tone was different this time. She wrote that they could have been mistaken, that they might have gone too far, and that if I was amenable to it, they would be happy to attempt family therapy. I was genuinely surprised since that was the first time she had even alluded to accepting some accountability. However, I continued to fear that this would just be another tactic to reintegrate me without making any significant adjustments. I'm at a crossroads now. I worry that things will simply return to as they were, but I also wonder whether this may be an opportunity for genuine development. It feels like there's a glimmer of hope for the first time, but I haven't determined if I'm ready to try family therapy yet. We'll see where this goes, I suppose. 5-Acre Time should be updated. After much deliberation, I made the decision to try family therapy. My parents hesitantly consented after I made it plain that I would only go if my therapist could accompany me as a support. The proposal was supported by my sister, who had recently grown more empathetic, who said that it would be an opportunity for everyone to listen to one another. We scheduled the session, so I went in expecting the worst but yet hoping for the best. To put it mildly, the first session was stressful. My parents were uneasy as they entered, as if they were unsure of what to anticipate. While my dad sat with his arms crossed, obviously protective, my mom kept looking at me, trying to determine how I was feeling. Things became problematic once my therapist let everyone to tell their story. The majority of what my parents said was that they missed me, were upset by the distance, and couldn't understand why things had to shift so suddenly. They said that they felt as though they had lost their daughter, and that they were baffled by my desire to avoid them. I made an effort to remain composed and reiterated that I needed some time and space for myself, not because I didn't want to see them. There were times when it seemed like we were repeating ourselves, but my therapist was there to assist get the talk back on course when it went off. Things didn't change much until my dad acknowledged that he had trouble feeling excluded from my life. My mother even expressed regret for some of the unexpected visits, acknowledging that she was unaware of how much I was upset. Although it seemed like a minor victory, I continued to exercise caution since I knew how easily things might go wrong. After the session, I had the impression that perhaps, just possibly, we were beginning to comprehend one another. My parents, however, urged me to start having weekly family meals again on the way home, claiming it would help them feel better about things. I reminded them that we should go cautiously and warned them that I wasn't prepared for it. My dad let out a long sigh and my mom became silent, but I refused to back down. There was uneasy stillness at the end of the drive. Once more, my sister attempted to mediate a conflict between us. She emphasized to my parents that putting pressure on me would just make me more distant. Even though I was relieved to have her on my side, my folks still didn't seem to understand. I made the decision to consent to one more family therapy session, but I made it plain that I would return to no contact if they were unable to respect my boundaries afterwards. Compared to the first session, the second one went better. My parents accepted a plan that called for prearranged visitation times. For a time, we would continue to meet at neutral locations like parks or restaurants and refrain from making surprise appearances. My dad nodded and said they would try, but my mom seemed a bit reluctant. Although I was cautious not to drop my guard too soon, it seemed like a victory. In fact, my parents did so for the following few weeks. Even if they were merely dropping off something, they texted before coming over, and they were kind when I informed them I had other arrangements. It was odd, but encouraging to see that they were making an effort. I began to feel cautiously hopeful that this could actually work out. I posted an update on Reddit stating that although things appear to be getting better, I was still maintaining a low bar. Many commended me on my success, while others cautioned me to continue being watchful. They reminded me that it's easy for individuals to revert to their old behaviors, and that true transformation takes time. I was grateful for their assistance and remembered their cautions. My pals were also dubious. They made the observation that my parents could simply be acting appropriately because they didn't want to lose me entirely. I acknowledged that I wasn't ready to let go of all the pain and worry, but I was open to seeing where this new dynamic would take me. They advised me not to jump into forgetting everything at once. And then there was a mistake, right when I thought everything was going well. When I returned home one weekend, my mother was outside my apartment. She had a tiny bag of baked goodies she had cooked and said she only wanted to see me for a moment. I could see the disappointment on her face even though I reminded her of our commitment. Even though it was somewhat difficult, I remained composed and advised her to call first the next time. She gave me a nod and walked away without a fuss, but I was still frustrated. My father called later that night. He expressed regret, said they discussed it, and promised to follow the strategy moving forward. Although I acknowledged the apologies, I made it plain that I was committed to upholding our agreement. I hoped that this would only be a little setback, and not an indication that things would start to go back to how they were. I've been visiting my parents on occasion ever then, but I don't stay long. To avoid becoming too comfortable, I always make sure to depart at a specific time. Although it's not flawless, it feels easier to handle than it did previously. One unexpected benefit of all of this has been the strengthening of my bond with my sister. In addition to becoming someone I can confide in, she has begun to challenge some of our parents' expectations of her. Even if things might never turn out precisely as I had anticipated, I've come to this realization as I sit here thinking about everything. I now know how to advocate for myself. I've discovered that putting my wants first, even if it means upsetting others I care about, is okay. I never imagined I'd be able to say that, but even if my connection with my family is shaky, it's on my terms now. When I posted my last update to my Reddit group, I received a ton of positive feedback. Although it's encouraging to know that I have support, I understand that this is only the beginning of a longer road. Knowing that I'll continue to work on upholding these limits regardless of what happens to anybody else in a comparable circumstance, I'm closing my narrative with a cautious feeling of hope. Simply said, keep up your efforts to keep your peace. Even when it seems like you're fighting alone, it's worth the effort. Story 3. After breaking into my home to take my late mother's wedding gown at my envious stepsister's request, my dog attacked my soon-to-be brother-in-law. To be in the middle of a drama-filled catastrophe, including a breakup with a jealous stepsister, and the threat of legal action is rather unexpected for me, a 29-year-old woman. However, this is the recent course of my life, so allow me to give you a thorough summary of the tumultuous events that have occurred. To provide some context. The love story between my parents was like a corny romantic comedy that ended up becoming a scary movie. I was born at a very young age. As a result, they were unable to manage the stress of both their jobs and fatherhood. They finally got divorced as a result of their constant arguments. I was just out of my teens at the time. My parents always maintained a cordial relationship and made the decision to remain friendly for my sake. My mother found solace in the embrace of the guy she thought was her true love when I was a college student. Carlos will soon be my stepdad. She phoned to share the good news that they were engaged. I wasn't happy that she was getting married again, but I also understood that I had no right to meddle in her affairs or prevent her from being happy. Carlos and his stepdaughter Amelia, who would soon become my stepsister, were introduced to me. I was never truly liked by Amelia at first. I couldn't understand why her mother had died so young, and it seemed like she thought I was a problem. Perhaps she thus believed that I was drawing attention away from her father, or perhaps she simply didn't like the thought of his being married to a parent. She treated me harshly every time we met and treated me with contempt. She clearly did not want to accept my mother or myself. As a result, Amelia would frequently express her displeasure with the new family situation or data, making family get-togethers difficult with forced smiles and awkward conversations. My mother did everything she could to diffuse the situation. In an effort to establish a sisterly link, I also made an effort to be amiable, but each time I did, she would ignore me or make disparaging remarks about my weight or looks. The time eventually came for my mom and Carlos to get married. They were marrying in the backyard, which had been converted into a temporary space with vibrant decorations and a lovely gazebo where they could exchange vows since my mother had always desired a small wedding. I assisted with my mother's wedding dress and cosmetics since I was both anxious and enthusiastic about her special day. As my mom walked down the aisle, Amelia's anger hung over the festivities like a black cloud. Amelia had a faint frown on her face that showed how she really felt. I saw Amelia sigh loudly and roll her eyes throughout the vows, as though the entire situation was beneath her. It was clear that she couldn't bear the thought of this marriage, and other visitors were beginning to notice her behavior. The reception room, which had a buffet of everyone's favorite foods and handcrafted decorations, was where the celebration finally went. People were dancing, drinking, and generally enjoying themselves. Amelia, meanwhile, seized every chance to dampen the spirits. Even when others tried to talk to her, she made snarky comments during toasts, which made the environment awkward. She expressed her disdain with succinct one-word responses. Amelia started acting more and more erratically as the evening wore on. She publicly criticized the decor, voiced her displeasure with the song selection, and declined to be photographed with the family. She seemed adamant about expressing her disapproval, disregarding the fact that it was ruining what ought to have been a lovely day for our family. I wanted to confront her because of her actions, but my mother tried to reassure me. She said we should allow Amelia space to process her feelings because she could be sad about her dad's second marriage. Over the years, Amelia never lived up to my mother's constant optimism that she would eventually change her mind. My connection with Carlos remained stable, but my conflict with Amelia kept becoming worse. Whenever I spent my college breaks back home, she would make fun of my lack of friends and my bad sense of style, and I would have to put up with it. Her father, Carlos, my stepfather, would intervene, reprimanding her and demanding an explanation. During those visits, the pattern of tension and coerced apologies kept coming up. Amelia would frequently poke fun at me during family get-togethers in an attempt to make me feel less confident. She would publicly disparage my successes, including my grades. In exchange, if I told her anything, she would attempt to play the victim by complaining to everyone about how terrible I was to her all the time. I always found it annoying when she would spread untrue rumors about me to family members in an attempt to damage my reputation for no apparent reason. She never changed over time, even though Carlos tried to halt her conduct after I repeatedly complained to him about it. I made the decision to spend more Christmas time at my dad's house rather than at my mom and Carlos's in order to get away from the negativity with Amelia. Although it was quite a trek because he lived across the country, the separation was a nice diversion from the incessant presence of a sulky and resentful stepsister. With her optimistic disposition, my mother would frequently try to convince me to join her for the holidays. But I didn't have the courage to tell her about the constant harassment I received from Amelia. I didn't want to crush her hopes of us getting along, so she clung to this romanticized picture. The holidays spent with my dad served as a respite from the negative energy at my mom's house. I could unwind without worrying about Amelia judging me. Dad's house became into my haven, where I could avoid Amelia's irate looks and hurtful remarks. During my third year of college, we were informed of some heartbreaking information regarding my mother. According to the results of her routine checkup, she was diagnosed with third-stage ovarian cancer. I nearly passed out in disbelief when she told me the news. Without my beloved mother, I couldn't picture my existence. I hurried home right away to be with her. Carlos was clearly upset, but he did his best to remain composed for the sake of all of us. In the face of this unclear future, my dad, friends, and family came together to support and console us. We managed the difficulties of medical procedures, hospital stays, and the emotional roller coaster that comes with such a sobering prognosis as the days went by. It's important to note that, regrettably, Amelia did not assist my mother in any way during this trying period. Her behaviors were unhelpful and insensitive while we were dealing with the terrible facts of illness. I recall sobbing while sitting by myself outside my mother's chamber one night when things were difficult. I hoped for some calm in the silence of the night, since I was terrified that my mother might die of cancer. However, I was sitting outside my mom's bedroom weeping when Amelia happened to stroll by. Rather than being kind or sympathetic, she simply grinned at me when she noticed how teary my face was. When I glanced up at her, she began to make fun of me, saying that there was nothing I could do right now. Her cruel response made things much more difficult for me at a time when I needed help. After that night, Amelia continued to be harsh in the days that followed. She even sent me posts on social media about the appearance of cancer patients in their last hours. Her ability to mock my suffering and the suffering our family was going through was awful. It was simply intolerable how heartless they were. I took comfort in my mother's resilience during those trying times. I was inspired by her fortitude in the face of hardship. Despite her bodily suffering as a result of the therapies, she continued to be an inspiration of bravery, showing me what it really means to overcome adversity. Even as the illness worsened, she continued to have a spirit that would not die. Unfortunately, my mother's disease worsened, and she died within a few months. The destruction I experienced was beyond words. For days, I sobbed because I couldn't accept that she was truly gone. I felt like I was surrounded by a thick cloud of anguish. Everyone said their goodbyes with tears during the solemn ceremony. After the funeral, the truth of her absence struck me, and I struggled to fill the vacuum left by her absence. The mourning process was a difficult and drawn-out one. It was a terrible reality that weighed heavy on my heart, to realize that I could no longer pick up the phone and hear her voice, or discuss the ordinary facts of my day. The world kept spinning, but I had lost my anchor and was lost in the sea of sorrow. The time has come to read my mother's will. As my mom's only biological child, Amelia, Carlos, my dad, and I all drove to the lawyer's office together. I knew exactly what the will included, having spoken to her about it many times prior to her death. Mom and Carlos had talked about it and agreed that their own children would inherit their separate assets. The complex dynamics of our mixed family were reflected in what appeared to be a fair arrangement. In the midst of a formal atmosphere, sitting in the lawyer's office, there was a sense of expectation. It became clear that all of Mom's assets were entrusted to me as the lawyer started reading her will. I wasn't surprised by this statement, since Carlos and I had known all along, but Amelia wasn't. As the lawyer read the will, she sat across the room, her eyes tightening in anger and shock. Mom gave me numerous family treasures in addition to the cash and belongings. It was really meaningful to me that she gave me my grandmother's exquisite jewels. I felt a connection to my heritage through those meaningful things. Her wedding gown was one priceless piece she left me, a representation of family history and affection. There was more to it than cloth. It preserved the recollections of Mom's memorable day. She also desired for me to own it. These were not only material inheritances, they played a role in the history of our family, and I really treasure them. After learning that my mother's will did not include her, she also received nothing, Amelia became furious. She started to act out, insisting on looking through the will to see if my mother had indeed given me everything she possessed. She glanced up at me after witnessing the will firsthand and said angrily that she was amazed by my mother's selfishness. She persisted in insisting that I share my mother's wealth with her because she deserved it, and I sat there in disbelief. The polite recognition of my mother's desires was disturbed by her hurtful and uncomfortable remarks. In her quest for a share of the fortune, she made cruel charges that were like daggers. Amelia's statements made me feel betrayed, even though I was already grieving over the loss of my mother. I was temporarily dumbfounded by her boldness in demanding an equal portion of my mother's possessions. In an attempt to remain somewhat composed, I mustered the fortitude to reply. I informed her that when we were both young adults, your dad and my mom were married. As a result, they both said up front that we would be receiving their respective assets. Respecting the pact our parents made with one another is more important than being self-centered. They thought this was reasonable, and I planned to respect my mother's desires. Carlos interrupted Amelia as she attempted to voice her grievance once again, adamantly reminding her that she had no right to want anything from me. He reminded her that she would inherit his property eventually, and that she wouldn't value it if I asked for a portion now. She appeared to stop talking after this. My father, who was present, stood up and escorted me out the room. Although I had frequently told him about Amelia's unpredictable behavior, this was the first time he had really seen it. Her feeling of entitlement astounded and sickened him entirely. My father suggested that I leave Carlos's house and relocate all of my childhood belongings, along with my mother's belongings and family antiques, to his home to prevent Amelia from stealing them. After agreeing, I transferred my mother's and my belongings out of Carlos's apartment right away. Carlos and I were both sad to see me go since, in contrast to Amelia, he always showed me love and respect. He has been in touch with me to see how I'm doing and to make sure everything in my life is going well. After graduating from college, I ultimately found employment. After a while, I had saved up enough cash to support myself. Although my mother left me few possessions, they were enough to enable me to buy a home of my own. My dad even came to stay at my new house since he was so proud of me. I frequently wished my mother could see the space I had made because I missed her. I kept her wedding gown in my closet, and I would hold it as though I were embracing my mother's memories whenever I began to miss her much. Carlos called me a little while ago to inform me that Amelia was getting married. To my surprise, I was actually pleased for her, putting aside our complaints from the past. "It's been a long time since we caught up," Carlos said, inviting me to lunch with his typical enthusiasm. I hesitated a little, but I wanted to make my favorite supper. He told me that Amelia had matured since our previous encounter, and that he would make sure that we had a cordial and easy lunch at Carlos's. It all appeared to be going well. I gave Amelia my warmest congratulations on her impending marriage, since she seemed really delighted to see me. While eating lunch, we spoke about how much our lives had changed since our last encounter. I could see how pleased she looked with my soon-to-be brother-in-law when she showed me photos of her engagement. Carlos had cooked a lunch, which we were all enjoying as we sat around the table. Amelia suddenly revealed something shocking. In a light-hearted manner, she said she was still looking for the ideal wedding gown, but had not been successful. Then, without warning, she mentioned that she recalled my mother leaving me a bridal gown and requested me to give it to her as a wedding present. I was shocked when I gazed up at her. My expression reflected Carlos's astonishment. Since she would never ask me for my mother's wedding gown, I asked her if she was kidding. Amelia, however, retorted that she should wear the dress as she was getting married before me. I was shocked by her ruthless remarks. I made it clear that I could never think of doing this, highlighting the sentimental significance of it for me. I told her when our mother passed away that it was more than simply a piece of apparel. It was a treasured remembrance of my mother. However, Amelia appeared to disregard my feelings. She maintained that she had an equal right to wear the outfit because we were stepsisters and had experienced some of our mother's life together. I couldn't understand why she would want to take something so important from me, and the tension in the room increased. Amelia was adamant in her request, saying that she was willing to pay me for the dress if that was what I wanted, despite Carlos's attempts to defuse the situation by informing her that she had no right to demand my mother's wedding gown. The tension kept increasing because I was offended and annoyed that she didn't see how important the outfit was to me. Seeing the tension growing, Carlos attempted to reassure Amelia that it wasn't about money, but rather that the clothing itself had special meaning for me because my mother had left it for me. Amelia went on to claim that I was being self-centered and that my mother would have given her the outfit if she had been living. Considering how she had treated me over the years, I was shocked by the boldness of her allegation. She didn't care about my mother while she was dying of cancer, and now she wanted to wear my mother's outfit out of the blue, I pointed out furiously. As we kept shouting at one another, the conversation began to get hot. I reaffirmed that I couldn't imagine parting with such a sentimental memento and that the garment was non-negotiable. The argument grew more heated due to Amelia's persistence and seeming indifference to my sentiments. Carlos attempted to defuse the situation, but I knew Amelia would not compromise. I made the decision to leave their apartment right away because I had had enough, and I wouldn't sit there and allow Amelia to treat me any worse. After thanking Carlos for the lunch, I walked out. My dad was equally as astonished as I was when I told him about the entire episode. He advised me to put cameras and an alarm system around my house right away. Although I felt that this was a little extreme, I chose to listen to my dad because I was aware of Amelia's bizarre behavior. Now fast forward to today. My phone suddenly explodes with alert notifications from my home security system when I'm at work and overloaded with meetings. An unknown male in a mask was entering my house when I opened the app. When I noticed the burglar at my place, I instantly became alarmed. As if my life depended on it, I phoned quickly and hurried home. There were police cars strewn across the front of my house as I screamed into my driveway. When I hurried inside with a distressed expression, I discovered that the man was being arrested by police. He had blood on his legs. My dog apparently became a full-fledged guard dog after taking offense at this intruder's unwanted visit. I let out an audible sigh of relief when the officers turned him around to lead him out. I instantly recognized him from Amelia's engagement photos. He will soon become my brother-in-law. He started yelling at me as soon as he saw me standing in the doorway, insisting that I call the police and testify on his behalf. He began by stating that my stepsister had forced him to remove my mother's bridal gown, which was why he was here. When I realized how ridiculous the scenario was, my eyes widened in disbelief. I couldn't see how he got himself into such an absurd situation, breaking into a house on someone else's orders. I shook my head, not believing it. But the cops stepped in and removed him before I could respond. After that, I contacted my father and told him what had transpired at my house. He promised to join me on the following flight that was available. The idea of my father's backing gave me peace. I meticulously inspected my home to make sure nothing was missing. Luckily, my mother's wedding gown, which was securely stored in my closet, was unaltered. After my dog courageously stepped in and attacked my brother-in-law, it appeared that his poorly thought-out scheme had failed. As I gave my dog a pat, I couldn't help but smile with happiness. The drama doesn't stop there, though. I've been getting calls from my envious stepsister's family requesting that I drop the charges against her husband. She is adamant that I forgive him because he is a member of the family. The last time I looked, relatives didn't break into your house and try to take your treasures, so I instructed them to keep their thoughts to themselves. For the harm done to my property, I have also threatened to sue her and her companion. This time, despite Amelia's constant threats that I will destroy their life, I will not back down. We're discussing my mother's legacy here. We're heading to court, so the dress stays with my sister, my soon-to-be brother-in-law, and a better lawyer up. The family is furious, but I'm supported by the law and facts. When will I be able to protect my territory and my mother's memories from the thief? First update. I haven't posted in a few days. Carlos and I had a discussion about everything that occurred. He was as surprised as I was. What Amelia and her partner had been up to was unknown to me. Knowing that her father would not condone her shenanigans, Amelia had purposefully kept him in the dark about her partner's break-in and subsequent incarceration. Carlos promised to support me no matter what choice I chose. Amelia had been contacting me daily in the meanwhile. She began to apologize after realizing that I would not back down. I had known her for many years, so this surprised me. She never expressed regret to me for anything. I suppose she finally realized what they had done after seeing her partner's detention. She pleaded with me to have pity on him and to dismiss the accusations. She promised that she would never bother me again, but I knew that her words were meaningless after all the years she had been harassing me. I adamantly informed her that I would keep filing charges and that they will soon appear in small claims court together. A lawyer who can assist us in this matter has been approached by my dad and me. I made a firm decision on Amelia's family, who were urging me to withdraw the charges. I sent a video clip from my security camera in a mass email. My brother-in-law was seen breaking into my house on this video. I couldn't allow it to happen because I knew Amelia would have told them a different narrative. No rational individual would condone such a heinous conduct. Some of her relatives did contact me to apologize after I sent the emails. My proof opened their eyes to the reality of the issue, which they were unaware of. Knowing that at least some of them recognized the terrible nature of the break-in and understood the truth of what transpired was a comfort. Update 2. My previous update was a month ago. I was too engaged with my legal actions to provide an update sooner. Like I already stated, I made the decision to file the charges in order to get justice for the break-in at my house. After a court struggle, I was given a fine for the harm the break-in had done to my property. I glanced at my stepsister's face, which was completely ruined, as if she had realized that her acts did have repercussions. Since her boyfriend didn't really take anything from my apartment, he was merely given a 3-month jail sentence for breaking and entering. Not only that, but my lawyer also filed a restraining order against my stepsister and her partner. It's an essential step to shield me from any future efforts to interfere with my life and to guarantee my protection. My dad has been staying with me to encourage me during this whole journey. He was still concerned that Amelia could try anything more, but after receiving a fine and a restraining order, I doubt she will have the courage. The legal repercussions will have prevented her from trying to stir problems again. Update 3. My previous update was 6 months ago. By now, my life has progressed, and happily, the drama is over. The tumultuous incidents that formerly characterized my days have faded into the past. I can finally find some serenity in my life now that the court fights, family conflicts, and emotional roller coaster have all abated. Amelia and her boyfriend have avoided me ever since the court hearings. The restraining order accomplished its goal by acting as a safeguard against any possible disturbances they may have brought about. After he was freed from prison, Amelia married him, according to several of our common acquaintances. Given how insane they are, I genuinely think they both deserve to be together. I've learned the value of resilience and sticking up for what's right as I think back on the tumultuous path of the previous few months. In addition to pursuing justice for myself, the court battles served to preserve the principles and memories that my mother cherished. My life has become more secure and tranquil. A new chapter has begun, and I'm excited to see what lies ahead, free from the turbulent drama that used to characterize my life.